What if Ron Weasley was sorted into Hufflepuff instead of Gryffindor? Part 7. Hey, brother! Y'all, I am not sure how much recap we need to do this time, but just to bring you right up to speed, last we left our heroes, Harry and Ron had battled their way to the end of the Triwizard Tournament, and after fending off Krum, found themselves standing before the cup. And after a brief discussion, Harry convinced Ron to take it and claim victory, telling him he'd truly earned it and was the champion truly chosen by the Goblet of Fire to represent Hogwarts. Ron, in disbelief and after some argument, consents and grabs the cup before suddenly and swiftly vanishing from the spot. And now, of course, we all know where he's going, but you have to imagine.
Bit of a nasty shock for him when he found out.
Well said, Seamus. Well said. But how will Ron's arrival in the graveyard change the story? Will Voldemort use his blood and still rise, or will Ron be killed? And what is Harry to do suddenly alone in the middle of the maze? Today, we find out. Harry stared dumbstruck at the spot where Ron and the glowing Triwizard Cup had just vanished at once. Was this part of the competition? It couldn't be. The cup was gone, meaning the only person who could make it through was the first person to arrive. Harry knew deep in his gut that something was wrong. Using Krum's wand, he shot red sparks skyward. In the meantime, Ron landed with a jolt in the dark grass of the Little Hangleton graveyard. Spinning on the spot, he looked around for where Harry had just been standing and then down at the cup still grasped tightly in his hand. A portkey, he said quietly to himself. But why? Then Ron's head spun again as he heard a muffled noise from the shadows of a nearby mausoleum. The boy! Is it the boy? The voice made every hair on Ron's neck stand up, and he stared in horror as a figure emerged from the shadows. There was a dark hood over his head, but there was no mistaking the long blonde hair around his neck. Lucius Malfoy was advancing towards him, wand drawn. And then he stopped, lowering his wand ever so slightly. He seemed to be considering something. Now, Ron doesn't have the full scope of the situation, but obviously he was not the intended target here, and Lucius was anticipating Harry, and now he has to make a decision. Tell Voldemort that the plan had failed, or just proceed anyway, using Ron's blood. Lucius had in fact argued many times with the Dark Lord over the course of the year about this exact point. It turns out he does not love taking care of the disgusting form of Voldemort in much the same way that Wormtail did not. Personally, I suspect it's the milking of Nagini that puts everyone off. It just honestly makes me want to throw up a little bit in my mouth, just saying it. He has urged his master to use any other wizard. Any wizard would do, and yet Voldemort has stayed true to his plan of seeking Harry Potter. Now, however, after months and months of planning, it had all failed. Harry had not shown up. Instead, it was the son of that filthy muggle-loving Arthur Weasley. Actually saying all those words in a row is much more upsetting than the whole milking Nagini thing. I got your back, Arthur.
Good lord.
But Lucius makes up his mind. He raises his wand again and thin cords tightly bind Ron to a nearby headstone and gags his mouth. Yes, my lord. We have the boy, Lucius announced into the darkness. And so he begins the process of making the potion, first dropping Voldemort, who's still wrapped in a cloak, into the cauldron, then taking the bone of Tom Riddle Sr., then slicing off his own hand. Somehow I feel like Lucius would really hate this particular part of the plan even more than Wormtail, who, to be fair, handled it with a certain amount of grace. Although, just for clarity, that is not me giving Wormtail any ounce of credit. At all. Ever.
That is me giving Wormtail credit.
That's actually an interesting question, though, as well, because can you imagine if that's why the potion didn't work? Because the servant didn't willingly give the flesh? Either way, though, he does do it through what I like to imagine are boyish tears, and then approaches Ron with the knife and scrapes a lightning bolt across his forehead to draw the blood. To match your brother, he taunts, while Ron screams into his gag. Not that it will matter. I don't think you'll ever be seeing him again. He drops Ron's blood into the potion and it shines a violent shade of red. It begins bubbling like crazy before turning into a blinding white light, and Ron stares in horror as Lord Voldemort rises from the cauldron, reborn. But when he opens his eyes and looks around expectantly for his long-sought foe, his slitted red gaze lands not on Harry Potter, but on Ron. Voldemort stands frozen, his smile fading to a cold, sharp sneer. You dare bring me this? His voice would be a hiss, the words slithering out like venom. Red hair, hand-me-down robes, this must be a Weasley. That's what my son said too, my lord. No, I'm only kidding. He doesn't say that. You said the boy was here, Lucius. You used someone else's blood to return me. You understood why I needed Potter's blood, did you not, Lucius? Lucius stood trembling and pale. Whether from his sacrifice or fear, it isn't clear. Stammers in panic, trying to explain the mix-up, but Voldemort would take a slow step towards him, eyes narrowing. It seems, Lucius, that not only have you failed me in retrieving the one boy who truly matters, but you have also sacrificed a hand for nothing. His voice is cold and mocking, his wand lightly tracing the air as he decides whether to kill Lucius outright or make him suffer. But please, my lord, we had made it this far. You were so weak. Weak! The high-pitched voice pierced into the air. Avada Kedavra! Lucius's body fell to the grass, motionless, eyes frozen in a look of stricken fear. Let us discover which of my followers have remained faithful all these long years, whispers Voldemort as he leaned down next to Lucius's body and rolled up the sleeve of his cloak on his severed hand, revealing the black ink of the dark mark. In seconds, there were loud cracks from all over the graveyard as Voldemort's supporters apparated into the clearing. Y'all, we need to pause right there to give a huge thank you to today's sponsor, Uncommon Goods. I don't know about y'all, but gift giving lives high amongst my love languages, so as we near the holiday season, I've personally already started scouting for some top tier giftables, and let me advise you no further than Uncommon Goods. Uncommon Goods looks for products that are high quality, unique, and often handmade or made in the US. They have the most meaningful, out of the ordinary gifts anywhere, and they even have gifts that you can personalize. I myself am the proud owner of the Fishpole Campfire Roaster and used it just this very past weekend on a camping trip with the entire family. And this bad boy can handle multiple mallows or hot dogs at once and is the perfect length to be able to get a great cook without roasting yourself in the process. Or if you're feeling exceptionally mushy, and no judgment if you are, you can scope out their couple hand-holding mittens. That's 2 single hand mittens and like 1 jumbo one to share. And then another one that caught my eye is the marked wine glasses that let you know what note will play based on how full it is. I mean, like, how fun is that? All of that and more, plus you can get 15% off your next gift when you go to uncommongoods.com/supercarlin. That's uncommongoods.com/supercarlin for 15% off. Don't miss out on this limited time offer. Uncommon Goods. We're all out of the ordinary. Meanwhile, back in the maze, Harry had fallen to his knees. His scar burned so terribly, his head felt in danger of splitting in half. He had just witnessed Voldemort's return, his anger at Lucius, Lucius's death, and worst of all, Ron. He had sent Ron in his stead when Voldemort had always intended for Harry to be the one to make it to the graveyard. Krum had never attacked him of his own volition. It was a setup, a plan to ensure Harry made it to the cup first. And just then Harry heard Moody breaking his way through the thorns and hedges. Potter! Moody shouted into the night as he made two-eyed contact with him. Potter! Where's Weasley? He followed Harry's gaze toward the plinth where the trophy had stood. You'd better come with me, Moody said, but there was a gruffness in his voice, and he took him stiffly by the arm and started guiding him through the maze. Harry could only guess that Moody's magical eye could see the correct way back to the opening as they traveled turn after turn. Finally, the pair broke into an opening and there was a brief eruption from the audience as they believed Moody was delivering the champion to the crowd. Though as Dumbledore, Crouch, McGonagall, and Snape converged on them, the packed Quidditch pitch fell silent before murmurs of discussions broke out. Portkey, Albus, Moody spat. Weasley, he's missing. Missing? What do you mean missing? Professor McGonagall chimed in. There's no way to tell with a portkey, is there? Responded Moody as everyone stared in disbelief. Graveyard, croaked Harry weakly. He's been taken to a graveyard. I could see him, and Lucius Malfoy, and Voldemort. He's back. Dumbledore stared intently into Harry's eyes before taking his arm and pulling him gently away from Moody. Then with a flick of his own wand, a small striped circus tent appeared, and Dumbledore shuffled them all inside. Back in the graveyard, Voldemort is walking amongst the circle of Death Eaters, taking inventory of who has returned. Avery, Knott, Crabbe, Goyle, McNair. Present but not named is also Yaxley and both Carrows. He explains Lucius's mistake and makes it clear that Harry Potter is their main target moving forward. Despite Lucius's mistake, though, he is back, and what's done is done. Lucius may have made a terrible failure, but he did deliver them a party favor, the adopted brother of Harry Potter and son of the muggle-loving Arthur Weasley.
And who are you?
Shall we have a bit of fun with Lucius's parting gift? He says, reveling in anticipation. With a flick of his wand, Ron is released from the bonds and falls to the ground, where Voldemort forces him to his feet and instructs him to duel. Ron is horror-stricken and not prepared for what's to come. Crucio! Yells Voldemort, and Ron is struck with the full force of the curse. Back in the tent, Harry's scar burns again, and he's visited by another vision of Ron in the graveyard, this time being tortured. What's all this, Dumbledore? Says a blustering Fudge, who enters the tent, followed by Barty Crouch Jr. Where's Weasley? Do we have our champion? Oh my! What is it, Potter? Says McGonagall, swooping down on him. He's torturing him. Voldemort's using the Cruciatus curse on Ron. Harry stammers through gritted teeth. His own skin seemed to be vibrating. What? He who must not be named, exclaims Fudge. What's he going on about, Dumbledore? Harry was just telling us about what happened in the maze, Cornelius. Apparently he and Mr. Weasley were attacked by Victor Crumb. Harry believes he was under possibly the Imperius curse. He and Mr. Weasley were able to overpower Crumb and make their way to the Triwizard Cup, which turned out to be a portkey. Crumb? Imperius? But who would? Sputtered Fudge. Someone was trying to get me to the cup first. Whoever put my name in the goblet. I think that's why Crumb attacked us in the lake and again in the maze tonight. Voldemort was furious with Lucius that I wasn't the first to touch the cup. I keep seeing into his mind. Lucius, he's dead. Malfoy, dead? He who must not be named restored? Surely this is nonsense. Ah! Harry fell to his knees as his scar burned again. Imperio! Voldemort shouted at Ron, who found himself immediately under the spell's influence. Voldemort's voice was speaking to him. Bow! It commanded him. He felt his back arch, but no! It was Harry's voice. Let him go! Ron, you have to fight it! So basically what's happening here is Harry is seeing it through into Voldemort's mind, which is currently controlling Ron due to their connection. And Harry is actually sending his own message through Voldemort, which is traveling through Voldemort's Imperius curse into Ron's mind. Upon hearing Harry's voice, Ron lifted his head of his own volition and met Voldemort's red eyes, which looked furious. Gripping the Holly Wand and with Harry's voice ringing in his ears, he thought briefly of their training before the third task, and on instinct lifted Harry's wand and shouted, Expelliarmus! Voldemort at the same moment fired back with Avada Kedavra! The forces of the spells collided. Priori Incantatem had been invoked. A beam of light connected Voldemort's wand to Harry's, and Ron saw the bead of light being forced back and forth between the two. The golden dome appears around them as Ron's ears are filled with Phoenix song, and then something else. It was Harry's voice again. Don't let that bead touch the wand, Ron. It took all the focus he possessed, but slowly, the bead started moving towards Voldemort's wand, and finally, it connected. Ron heard his own screams fill the air, and then the ghostly form of Lucius Malfoy emerged from the point where the wands connected. It looked savagely down on Voldemort, who stared up, his eyes wide in fear. Malfoy turned to Ron. The cup will take you back. Bring my body with you. Malfoy was followed by an old man Ron had never seen before, and then Harry's parents, James and Lily Potter. Thank you, Ron. You've given Harry a family. Ron spared a momentary glance to look into the eyes of Lily and James. They looked so kind, so warm. We can give you just a few seconds head start. Break the connection. Now! Ron wrenched Harry's wand upwards and made a sprint for it. He dove on top of Malfoy's body and pointed the Holly Wand at the cup. Accio, he shouted and grabbed it. He was gone. Dumbledore, this boy is clearly speaking madness, losing his mind. Surely you don't. But there was a loud thump just outside the tent as Ron reappeared with the dead body of Lucius Malfoy. Loud cheers filled the arena once again as the crowd interpreted Ron's return as his victory in the tournament, but those cheers quickly turned to screams as they realized he was holding a dead body.
This is my father.
Fudge stood stunned in disbelief that Harry's words all seemed to be true. Lucius was dead. Ron returned, clutching the cup, and worst of all, had a lightning bolt slashed across his forehead. How did you get away, Mr. Weasley? Dumbledore asked in a calm and comforting tone. But before Ron could answer, there came a sputtering noise from just inside of the tent that drew everyone's attention back inside. There sat Moody, frantically searching for something deep in his pockets. He located his hip flask and took a desperate sip, but nothing came out. And without warning, his face seemed to start to melt. Stupefy! It was Barty Crouch Sr. who watched in horror as the shape of his stunned son appeared on the ground in front of him. The next few hours were a complete blur for Harry. The crowd at the third task had turned into a complete panic, the worst of which was Draco emerging from the stands and collapsing at his father's side, vowing to get revenge on Ron.
This is my father.
Ron had explained everything that had happened in the graveyard after the portkey took him, which matched everything Harry had seen. Barty Crouch Jr. was questioned under Veritaserum with Fudge present and explained the entire plan, how he'd escaped his father's home last spring, put Harry's name in the goblet, put Crumb under the Imperius curse twice, and this go round the evidence is simply too overwhelming. Fudge cannot deny the return of Voldemort, and therefore must take his return seriously. Which cracked the door for a multitude of enormous questions. What does this mean for the Order of the Phoenix? Where does Umbridge show up, if at all? How will Draco's allegiance be played out after his father's death? And will the prophecy still be at stake? Tune in next week to find out where we're going to try to wrap up the entire Ron and Hufflepuff saga in part 8. If you want to click this link over here, that should take you to that video as soon as it is live. Otherwise, guys, be sure to let me know all of your thoughts in the towel section down below. And until next time, bye.